I focus principally on the interfaith aspect and how faith and different religions interact throughout the Middle East and how they interact in the West as well. So that's how I came to be working for Edinburgh Interfaith Association, where we work towards building bridges between diverse communities and for mutual respect. I am Catholic, and I'm intrigued to hear the experiences and views of our panelists today towards understanding the dynamic of power in organized institutions and how we can mutually upbuild each other. So when I came to the university, I joined the Catholic Student Union. And it was a surprise to me that most of the committee members and most of the power and organizational into this union was held by women. So I am myself part of the committee. I'm going for secretary, and that to me is my power, and I love to hear how we can, proceed in this this process of rebuilding women in faith positions. So we are excited to have two women leaders from different faith backgrounds, but what unites them is their passion for empowering women. They will be sharing their personal experiences, challenges, and strategies for success. Our panelists will discuss the importance of representation, the role of mentorship, and the power of networking. Today, we are extremely honored to have the privilege of introducing our chair, Shipra Kohli. Shipra is an exceptional member of the Edinburgh Interfaith Association, having served years on our board, and she's also part of the chaplaincy at University of Edinburgh. Shipra has played an instrumental role for initiating and organizing several interfaith events aimed at fostering greater dialogue and collaboration between women and between diverse faith groups. She has been a strong advocate for women's rights and empowerment, particularly within minority groups and with charitable associations. This interview is not just about celebrating the achievements of these women, but also about creating a roadmap for aspiring women leaders. We hope that this conversation will inspire women to pursue leadership positions within faith communities and equip them with the tools they need to succeed and break through the glass ceiling. As a young woman, I am looking to learn more from these women and their wonderful insight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our wonderful chair, Shipra, and let's get started and break the glass ceiling together.
Thank you, Sophia, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. I know everybody's busy. Sun has been shining today for us, so that's a blessing. I will introduce our two revered ladies. Rev Fiona Smith. She's the first woman to take up the role of Principal Clerk of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland on a permanent basis since the role was formed in 1572. Fiona is a former lawyer, and prior to her new role was a minister of Ness Bank Church in Inverness. The post of Principal Clerk requires in-depth knowledge of church law, history, practice, and procedure. For those who don't know much about the Church of Scotland structures, the Church of Scotland is entirely self-governing. It is managed on a local level by Kirk Sessions, at a district level by pre-bistries, and at a national level by the General Assembly, which comprises of 850 commissioners and meets in every May, generally in Edinburgh. The role of the Principal Clerk is to act as the clerk to the General Assembly, which includes advising the Assembly and the moderator on church law, practice and procedure, as well as providing training courses and advice to Kirk Sessions, pre-bistries, ministers, and other church bodies. The role also includes supporting and advising the moderator throughout their year in office and supporting the Kirk's engagement with both the Scottish Government, Scottish Parliament, and Westminster as ecumenical and interfaith relationships. And Fiona, would you like to come and have a seat?
Thank you.
Please welcome Reverend Fiona Smith. And Trishna Singh. Trishna Singh is the founder-director of Sikh Sanjog, the only Sikh family support charity in Scotland, and Punjabi Junction, the social enterprise, the first Sikh women's social enterprise in Scotland, which was created to empower women and to be led by women at the helm, making their own choices and decisions rather than being led by men. Trishna has over 35 years experience working in voluntary sector. She doesn't look over 40 herself. She graduated from the Glasgow University with a degree in Community Learning and Development in 2007. In recognition of her services to the community, she is the first Sikh woman in Scotland to have received an OBE in 2014. Her work is centered on the thematic areas of community development, gender, social justice, civic engagement, race equality, and human rights. She was appointed first honorary Sikh chaplain to Edinburgh University in 2012 and is currently part of the chaplaincy team. She has extensive knowledge and understanding of the Sikh religion and culture from the lived experience of women. In her fantastic autobiography, A Silent Woman Speaks, she shares her story, including her battle for full gender equality for women in the Sikh community, where she explains that community traditions and cultural requirements often made women subservient and were in direct opposition to the teachings of the Sikh religion, which states man and woman are equal. Please welcome Trishna Singh OBE. Hello. So we will just, over to you, Reverend.
Well, right, well, you've got me. It's wonderful to be here this evening, and it's my first time in this beautiful church, but I know many, and it's lovely to reconnect with people. And it's a huge privilege to be here to talk about the role of women in faith communities and to share our stories. Trish and I met last week at an interfaith, it was last week, wasn't it? Was, yes. Yeah, no, honestly, it feels, weeks go by, they feel like a year. And to be able to share with you some of my story and my perspective on it. And I hope, Sophia, that we meet your wonderful speech at the beginning about that we can give you answers to some of the questions that you have asked us.
Wonderful. Opening remarks by Trishna.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I did meet Fiona last week as well. And it's been a long journey, and as Sophia said, for me, it's about empowering and inspiring a younger generation of women that have been held back, so I hope that we're able to fulfill that. But it's really wonderful to be here. I've seen so many people that I haven't seen for such a long time, and one of my mentors in my very first days is here sitting, Jenny McCallum. And just to say, Sophia, when I first started, I didn't know how to work a photocopier. And it was this lady here that helped me. And so, you start, everybody starts from somewhere, but you move on. So look forward to sharing.
Thank you. So I would just ask you, what was the biggest challenge or obstacle you faced, let's face it, in this patriarchal world?
I think if we go back to growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was expected that I go to university. I thought, the issue of women and men, there wasn't an issue. And I went to Manchester University and read law in 1988. I had articles in London at the age of 20, and I remember being interviewed for a city law firm, and they spoke to me about, just a little bit about sexism, as it was called in those days, and how would I deal with it. And I remember in my, wonderful enthusiasm of youth going, well, I would be absolutely prepared. I would know what my arguments were, what my work was. And, you know, and it was the whole emphasis was upon proving that I was as able as a man. Actually, is how I answered it. And the partners interviewing me, because I gave the impression that it was to be, you know, I was going to experience sexism within the law firm. And the partners all turned around and went, well, of course, we don't have it here, you know. But we were asking you that question in how you would deal when you're in court and everything else out in the big wide world. But it was actually becoming into my mid-20s of then beginning to realize that there was this inequality. And that the pressure for a woman is that you have got to work harder to prove greater and to be better in order to be recognised. And I mean, Ian had asked about a word that would sort of encapsulate the journey. And for me, now in my 50s, the word I've come up with is revealing. And why I say revealing is because as I've journeyed on through my legal career and then my call into the ministry, is that I have, through the different experiences and becoming a mother and, you know, becoming a parish minister in the Highlands, and I can talk a bit more about that in a wee while, but I don't want to dominate, but each stage has brought a new awakening to me of the position of women. And as I have looked differently at different stages in my life, and for me tonight, I'm not somebody that would normally speak in this sort of thing about myself. That's not who I am. But I've just recently come back from South Sudan on the ecumenical pilgrimage, peace pilgrimage, and 70% of the women and girls in South Sudan suffer from sexual violence. This is in a predominantly Christian country. And I have come away from that. We've all read the facts, but having met the women and girls. And for me to be there, although I had no speaking part, but I was there and recognised as a clerical leader in the church, albeit the Church of Scotland, was important symbolically for the women. And I want to start voicing women and being a voice for the voiceless. And we also need to talk more openly within our society today to not just assume that the glass ceiling has been broken, because sadly, it's not true.
That is so true. Voice for the voiceless, I think that says it all. If we all could do that, that'll be amazing. Thank you. What about you, Trishna? What would you say?
Mine is kind of, my story is like the other extreme of Fiona's, because having been born and brought up in the 50s and 60s in Glasgow to immigrant parents who'd come from India after the partition of India and Pakistan. So we as girls were very much held back in all aspects because of the culture of our community. And so we grew up with that kind of village background of the women are at home and the men are the ones that are the breadwinners. So we were always in the background. And growing up, for me, that became a kind of thing that how do we get through this? And we have equality within our scriptures. And it was as I got older, I began to read and understand the scriptures. And that's what gave me the strength and courage to actually say, we need to stand up to this. And going through life, like say I'm in my 70s now, so it's been a very long journey. And 35 years ago, when we started Sikh Sanjog, it was the only Sikh women's family support charity in the whole of Scotland, and it still is the only one. So everybody links the Sikh community to the Gurdwara, and that is the hub of the community, like the Sikh temple. But for the women, they're always in the background. And for me, it was against all the principles, everything that was in the religious ethics. So we used that basis from our religion, what it said about equality for women, and we created this organisation so that the women from our community could learn about their own religious values and know that they had equality. And that helped us to shape the way forward. But staying within the community to make change was very difficult.
Yes.
To remain within the cultural boundaries, because we weren't out to act, we were out to inspire and encourage women and let them understand that they had value, they had something to contribute to the mainstream community as well as to themselves. And they were intelligent and they had a right to be there. But within the structures of our Gurdwaras, there has been some change over the years, but there's not that equality in where the decisions are made. And so hence the reason our organisation was led by women, still is led by women, but it was to give them that power to be able to make change. And we have made lots of change for women. You know, women that before 20 years ago would never have even thought about working in a mainstream shop. And they, you know, like, it wasn't that the languages was a barrier, it was the internal cultural barriers that held them back. And in some way, when we think that we have broken the glass ceiling, I don't think we've even touched it.
No, I agree.
It's a long way to go.
So, especially when people don't want to talk about the internal barriers. And so for us in the very beginning, when we first started, it was very much for about 5 years that we were so involved in trying to break down the internal barriers to get women out. And it was staying within those cultural barriers to enable them to know that they still valued everything about their religion and their culture, but they were women in their own right. They were people in their own right. They should be able to make decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was, I didn't go to university until I was 51.
Wow.
Oh, but fantastic. And may I say, I can't believe you're in your 70s. You look fabulous. But you know, I find that where our stories, I suggest, cross over is the change in perception that I discovered, and that's why the word is revealing, was when I answered the call into the ministry.
Yeah.
And that's then, I went on a journey, and I left London, we came back to Scotland. I'm half Scots, half English, so I was brought up in London, but always Church of Scotland. I started at St Mary's in St Andrews University doing my degree, and then beginning to just realise that the culture within the Kirk and within Scotland was also different to necessarily what I'd experienced in the south of England. And then, wonderfully, our daughters came along, so I paused, and I couldn't work out then, how could I be a parish minister and a mother? So, and it was a difficult time, because I knew I had an understanding of parish ministry, but I had an understanding of motherhood, which, or how I hoped to be a mother. My mother sadly died suddenly when I was a child, so I didn't have. And I set up, you're saying about a women's group, I mean, set up, and it's still running today, and it's 20 odd years old, in St Andrews, because St Andrews is a place where so many people come for the university and everything else who are away from family. And it was a support group for linked to the health centre for women. And I think that started my journey to really begin to work with women, and not, you know, as the world teaches us that, you know, we women are all catty together, and actually, you know, we can be our own worst enemies, which tends to be. So the sense of call, and then when the girls were little, I pulled back. Now, it was interesting. It was older Kirk ministers, the late Reverend Professor William McCain, who was one of my referees. And actually, he'd said to me, Fiona, you know, just because you're pregnant, you carry on. But actually, so he was in his 80s. It's not always an age thing. It was actually younger that were going, this doesn't fit. You know, how can you do that? And how much of that was my own pressure, and how much it was cultural expectation and conditioning. Yes. But in the end, we did. My husband and I swapped roles, and there was all sorts of reasons as to why we did that. And we've gone on a real journey. He is here this evening because he's been the minister's spouse. And actually, we have had, there's such a lot, you know, people have been so intrigued about this, as though it's something ridiculous. And that how can the girls, and over the years, my daughters have, you know, I've gone to them, am I neglecting you? You know, the responsibility is on me, because the church would always be telling me, you know, you're a workaholic, Fiona, what about your daughters? And I had that all of the time. And then when I was called to Inverness, I was the first woman minister in the capital city of the Highlands. And I had votes against me at a time when really most ministers, when they were happy, we do an election and the congregation votes and says whether they like you. You don't tend to get votes against you. And I sort of thought, I know I will, because this is breaking a glass ceiling up in the Highlands. And I said to God, never do a bargain with God. I said, if I get more than 20 votes against me, I'm going to have to say no to the call. So guess what happened? 19.
Oh, wow.
So, and I mean, there'd been about 400 people in for my preaching, and about, I don't know, 150 or a lot left after the service. And I thought, well, maybe they left because they didn't like it, and they didn't even stay for the vote. But 220 had voted for me, so how did it work? So there was this shock horror on the session clerk's face. I'm going, I'm not accepting the call till I know those aren't 19 elders, and in the Church of Scotland they would be male. Elders going, we're not having that woman, and it wasn't, and I took the risk. But I never realised, and that, when you talked about the culture of your community, of what my presence in Inverness, and it was splashed everywhere, much more, and I had colleagues in the presbytery that wouldn't come to my ordination because I was a woman. People that never had really understood in the Kirk from the Central Belt's point of view, of actually that even being a woman minister was not recognised. And if it hadn't have been for some of the male elders in my Kirk session, who over the years have really supported me and helped me recognise where I am being prejudiced simply because of my gender. Because just like you, our scriptures have an equality. And why is that voice not heard?
And it's still there. For me, I mean, I had 4 children, and I was very, very conscious of the fact that I was the first woman from our community to actually go and work in an office.
Yes.
And so, and then surrounded by a community of people that were watching
Who make you
and
feel guilty
thinking,
every day.
yes, and it was the fact that, you know, her daughters will not know anything about the culture. They won't know anything about cooking, because that was the main thing for us, like teach your daughters how to cook and so on. And so all of that pressure was behind me. But there was something that I knew, that there was nothing for the women from our community, and if we didn't create something that would give them a kind of somewhere to be themselves, somewhere to be able to acknowledge themselves as women, as mothers, you know, and also as individuals, and to know their worth.
Absolutely.
Because all of the time, the worth is about how good a mother is she, how good a daughter-in-law will she be, how good is she as a grandmother, all of these things, and not as the person, you know, what can she contribute?
Absolutely.
And so, for me, the religious aspect was my own personal journey and learning and understanding about it. We have priests as such, Gyanis, and we have a lot of women that learned enough in the scriptures to hold a service. But I don't, you know, that was something that I took part in reading from the scriptures, but I never actually went further than that. But for me, it was the understanding from within our scriptures that gave women this, you know, this space, this role, that they were equal in strength and courage and being able to support their families. And it was all just, it was there, but it was never put out to the women.
Yes.
And so through that, you realise that actually there is something always missing. And even now, I mean, when we compare ourselves, we are a first generation born and brought up here. And we were brought up in that culture, that they came with that culture. They were steeped in that culture. They didn't want to lose it. You know, and I don't think they ever imagined that they would live here, die here, grandchildren would be born here. And so there was the way the different communities came at the different times and different stages. So our community came over in the very mid-40s, late 40s, early 50s, 60s, and then there was an influx. And then the influx that came in the 70s, late 60s, their view, their thinking was different. And so, you know, huge chunks of the community, people moved on in different directions. But the ones that came in the early days, it's like they were more Indian than the Indians.
Yes.
You know, and that was really important to them, that they didn't want to lose
You try to
that.
hold on to the roots
They
even
hold
more
on to,
strongly.
And so making that stand and seeing that we had this women. So, I mean, we're known all over the United Kingdom because we have women who have come from England and married into families in Edinburgh. So through our organisation, they're able to actually fulfil some of their own wishes and dreams of knowing that I can actually do this. And they go back home and then they get asked, why, you know, could you start a branch of Sikh Sanjog in London or something like that? And it's like, but there's a huge, you know, there is still that barrier of acknowledgement by the men that, you know, my late
Even
husband,
women.
yeah,
Yeah.
but my late husband was very, very supportive of everything that we did, and that's why I was able to, in that way, stand up and have that support and be able to move on
So that's what
and make that change.
I was going to ask next, that, you know, with all these barriers established, what kept you going? I think?
I mean, for me, I very much sensed a call to Inverness and to Ness Bank Church and to the work that I had the privilege of doing there. And it was the congregation, it was the support of elders there, and I say particularly the men. But obviously also, like you're saying, my husband, who we've been looked at over the years in a very strange way. And that also he then, everybody goes, oh, poor Andrew, married to her, you know. And that somehow he also gets belittled in it as well.
Yes.
Because she must be, you know, in order to do what she does, you know, you get stereotyped.
Yes.
But what I also found was actually a bit like yourself saying that because I was challenging the stereotypes within Highland culture, and yet it was just Fiona, and that's who I am. I find something in Scottish culture. I mean, I never used my letters after my name when I was in London, and then I come to Scotland and everybody has all that. I find that very odd. And it was women in Inverness that were then beginning to learn their shape of a minister was different. And I remember one lovely lady who's a phenomenal woman, Fenella, and she's in her 90s. And Fenella took a while to get used to this, you know, woman. And she said to me after a few, she said, Fiona, she said, you know, you're really, you know, Invernessian born and bred. You know, everybody knows you. You're just Fiona. And that for her was the sort of, gosh, you know, not Reverend, you know, blah, blah, or Ness Bank Church. And it became the laugh that, you know, even though this woman was leading this church, the roof didn't fall in. And actually was you know, it grew. I mean, then you then start sounding about your successes. And I don't like that because it's not who I am.
But that's again another woman thing, to be honest. We always undermine ourselves, even now. You know, if somebody praises me, I'm like, oh, you could just go all, I don't know which way to look, but I'm trying to not be like that. Yeah, why not? But boast if you've done something great.
But then also I question, you know, about how we own a different model of leadership.
Yes.
That is akin to who we are as women.
Yes.
And I'm not interested in saying, you know, how large my car park is beside my church. I mean, what's been interesting is that also I found over the last 12 years, leading to me being Principal Clerk, is all the things that I have done in the church. It was not completely noticed. People have been surprised at me becoming Principal Clerk. I was it was out of left field. Again, I felt very much it was a call. And then I have to sort of, I then hear myself, well, you know, I was the business convener and I've done judicial things and you go, why are you having to justify that? Either the interview panel and the stakeholder panel and all the processes I went through to actually be appointed, either they were having a really, you know, the devil had taken over them that day and they got it all wrong, or I should trust them. But it has been fascinating. And also what's fascinating is what does leadership mean when it is a woman? And nobody yet until I get my first General Assembly done this year, is people do not know how this is going to work with me as Principal Clerk. And how you use authority and how you shape that and how you lead in that space. And I don't own the space yet.
Well, power to you. Hopefully you will soon. What would you say, Trishna? What kept you going?
I think it was that
all the
something
barriers?
internally inside me
A calling.
from a very young age. It was that calling and I didn't know it was a calling then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like, we need to have something, we need to do something. We weren't born just to cook and clean.
Yes.
You know, there is something else out there. And you saw other people moving on. We were always on the sidelines. And it was a case of, right, we have to make change.
Certainly.
And for me, it was like there was no plan. There was no big plan. There was no big business plan. It was just that we need to have a space of our own where the women can come together and learn about that there is a world outside there and that we can access it. And so it was a gradual building of that. But there were many times when and there was pressure from community, from family, and it would be like, you know, maybe we should just call it a day. And then something would come up and I would think, no, we can't. We just have to take this and move forward. And the challenges were many because it was the internal culture. There was women that were against it because then they could see that other women were moving on. And then we also, it was like it was a culture and it was also a ripple effect. So for example, our social enterprise, Punjabi Junction, we created that for the women who had these wonderful skills of cooking, but they had never worked in mainstream. So they came, they volunteered, and we ran for 15 years. We are on hold just now, but through that process, about 300 women came as volunteers with those skills, and they ended up going into so many different roles and jobs that they would never have dreamed of. But it was that confidence. They needed to be somewhere that understood their culture and the culture of their community and their lifestyle, and then they were able to move forward. So there was many times when you know, people thought like that's it, Sikh Sanjog is going to close, but then we kind of got to that edge. And then something would come up, and then we would just go on again. So there was that calling, but there was also that need for people to see. And even now, there is still a need, even though we've been running for 35 years. But the needs change, so we change with the times. But it's evolving, and you're looking at women that are working as their lawyers or professionals. And then there's also still that challenge of discrimination that is there. And we don't want to talk about it. And especially when it's coming from women, and it's at different levels. And so we have internal discrimination and we have external. And it's those challenges that we need to keep, I don't know, it's like trying to break through, but it's also having that inner strength.
Yes, to keep
and that
going,
takes a lot to keep going.
But we still have internal discrimination in the Church of Scotland. In 1966 and 1968, you know, we led the way in ordaining women to the eldership and then to the ministry. But there are still Kirk sessions that have no women. And then I get told, oh, because the legislation was permissive, so you have a choice not to have women in leadership. No, you don't. It's just not mandatory. And we've been ordaining women for over 60 years. The idea that there's nobody in your congregation who's got the gifts and skills and talents to actually take on a place on the Kirk session is discrimination.
Yes, absolutely.
And we do need, and then it's sort of somehow frowned on that you even raise it. And coming from the Highlands, we've got more women in the Highlands of Scotland now, but it's highlighted that it's still within the Kirk, and then also this theology that's complementarianism, and what does that mean? But at the same time, what we're not doing, and you're not doing, Trishna, is decrying the role of a woman who wants to be the homemaker and do that. But we also need to say that women have been working ever since there was Adam and Eve or whatever. You know, we've always worked. And that idea that we haven't is actually a wrong lens.
And then there's so many invisible, like people create this kind of barriers that women don't feel comfortable. So you will have a general election for the Gurdwara committee, and it's every year, and it's an annual general meeting, and people can go and vote on their new president or whatever. But the women just don't go. Because it's been created in such a way that women have never attended these meetings. And it's always the men. And then people will say, but this is an open election. It might be an open election, but in some places it's open and it's not so open. And that's where the barrier is for us not to have. There are women that are on some committees in some Gurdwaras across the United Kingdom and maybe even in India. But there are far more that don't have women, and that is the reason, is that internal barrier that nobody wants to, nobody wants to break through that.
It was like, I a few years ago was asked to start doing Thought for the Day on Radio Scotland, and Elsa McIntosh, the producer, she had to ring me quite a few times, because I was going, nobody wants to listen to me. And there's also there's the internal barriers about how we perceive things, then there's internal barriers about how things, and if it hadn't have been her pushing the fact she wanted to have more women on Thought for the Day, and then she was very clever, because then we're chatting with her on the phone, and I'm going, well, I don't think so. And then I'm going, but I've got 2 daughters, and I need to be a role model for them. So she was very clever. She basically, without doing it, got me to talk myself into doing it. So that was good. But it was, and then the nerves, the courage to actually be that,
I actually got invited to do Thought of the Day.
And did you do it?
No, I didn't. It was all that, just what you've just described. It was like, am I able to do this?
Yes.
Will I be good enough to do this? And it was Ilsa.
We get it in our jobs, it's imposter syndrome. We get in our work roles, but as a woman, I feel that being a woman, can I do this? Because it's always been done by men, whatever it is. So it is internal barriers.
Ilsa gave up on me because.
That's so fun. Oh, I'm sure it's not too late.
Yes. Come on, Trishna. Okay, let's bring some positivity then. So what barriers do you think you successfully broke down? Were you able to? I'm sure there are some.
I suppose where I am now, and it's been the heart of my ministry, and I continue to be a minister, is about being myself. Because actually I believe fundamentally that from my faith, that through Christ we are accepted and loved for who we are, and that is the discipleship, and we are called to accept others for who they are. And if you're going to accept others, and that increases compassion and understanding as well, because if you look at your own self with honesty, you know where you fail and faults and what have you. And actually it's about not needing to say, I do use humour a lot, I am self-deprecating, I do say things like, I'm absolutely bricking it to have the first General Assembly, which is not the sort of things that the Principal Clerk should really be saying, should they? I am supposed to be all-knowing and the fixer, and so I feel very vulnerable, but I have done that in my ministry, because it is about owning a space that I'm creating a space for women to be comfortable in. And a very good friend of mine said to me, I really wish, Fiona, someone else had gone before you. And because she's a very good friend, dear friend of mine. And I don't want to sound negative about the Kirk, I love the Kirk, but we are in the Kirk and we're in a small group, and I need to learn to find that voice that says this, because actually, it's not, I don't want to be classed as, the feminist.
Yes.
I'm just Fiona, of which, I am created in the image of God, as everybody else is here, and that what I can try to do is and learn to believe that actually, yes, I am capable of doing this job, which I do know, and it's that sense of call and that belief, and a wonderful husband who has given me a lot of courage, and the incentive of my daughters, that actually I need to do that for them as well.
And what about you, Trishna? Do you feel any barriers you've broken down over the years?
Oh yeah, over the years.
Many
barriers that have been broken down, especially when I look around at the community of women and our younger generation of girls that are able to go to university without anybody batting an eyelid, and actually being encouraged and supported by their parents and their family, and women actually proudly saying, oh, my daughter's at university, or my granddaughter's at university. And that all comes to the fact that we broke through those barriers to show people that by going to university or working outside out with the home, we weren't losing our culture. It was that is the biggest fear. And things have changed so much now, especially when I look around in Edinburgh and I see all these young women and the ripple effect that has had so many women that are now working in places like things that if you said to them you would be 10 years ago, you would be working in a mainstream in Boots, just for example, and they would have just thought, no, that's never happened. Yeah. It's impossible. So there's so much change has happened through standing there. And I suppose when you talk about yourself and you feel uncomfortable thinking, oh, like I did that. And I think it comes with, over the years, it's confidence. You build your own confidence. And now if you had said to me 15 years ago or something, you'd be sitting on live stream or whatever.
Are we on the telly as well?
Yes.
But having then looked at it and written my book,
Yes.
and seeing how that has been perceived by the whole community, so by male and female from within our community, has been very positive, because then that's, for me, it has shown that everything that we were doing, there were people that disapproved, but equally quietly there were people that actually approved, but they weren't able to see it out in public. And I think that's something that people need to acknowledge now, that we're at a place where women can do these things. They should be leading. But I don't know how long it's going to take to actually really break those glass ceilings, because mainly you look at the wider white Scottish community, and there is the assumption that women from those communities have a lot more freedom. They don't have barriers. There are no barriers. The barriers are all within the ethnic minority communities, from wherever they might be. And for me, it's been that learning, and also being able to share that with other women.
Yeah, and I don't think I felt that. I grew up in India. Strangely, I felt that, coming here to a so-called developed country, I thought it was more backward in that sense. I felt that. Thankfully, I'm from my parents are quite, what's the right word? I don't know, modern, is that the right word? Like, we are three sisters, and we were all given education, master's degrees, and there was not even an eyelid battered, so I didn't understand. So, it was expected, after school you go to uni, then post, master's you get, and then work, And then suddenly when I came here, I was like, it was the other way around for me, shocking, like in the workplace, I work in finance. We were just talking to Sophia that, I couldn't go in this flashy pink suit. I would want to. I was loving it. But, I'm like, I wish I could. Maybe it's the courage, but I had a meeting earlier today, 20 people, 2 women out of there, So this is still the state of in finance. Women in finance is still like a hashtag women in finance. Why? We shouldn't have that in 2023. That should be a normal thing. But that's how it is still. So it's not just ethnic minority or any. This status of women is still a question in every community, every religion, whatever color or creed.
Now, when I speak to younger women who are in professions like lawyers, school teachers, working in social care and then NHS, and when we talk about it, we did a report, and we have become the voice of the Sikh women in Scotland, and that was something that we kind of held back from saying, thinking, oh, do we have the right to say that? But actually, when I think about it and I think of the journey that we've had, we are that voice, we are that platform.
Absolutely.
And when we held the very first Sikh Women's conference, and it was just a week before lockdown, and they produced a report, and I was surprised because there was over 100 Sikh women from across Scotland from the ages of 16 upwards that were involved in this. And when we pulled the report together, I was very surprised and shocked at how these younger women that are in all these professional careers, what kind of discrimination there still is in employment and moving up and getting, moved up to promotion. And that surprised me, because I was thinking that we've moved on, and our communities have moved on, and people are, and women are in these positions. But a lot of them in the report, they were saying things like, I feel like the token person.
And Desert Island Disc, which I did catch last weekend, was Amanda Blanc, who is CEO of Avia, so top FTSE 100. And it was fascinating, to hear her stories. So do have a listen to it. And she was saying it was a shareholders meeting last year, and she actually did go public because shareholders were absolutely rude to her, the comments about her being a woman, and she went public on it. And there's only 8 women who are leading the FTSE 100. We've got to keep talking about it. And I think what you're saying as well, that it's across all communities and all societies. And we, in the supposed developed West, can't take the take the eye off the ball, that actually the rights of women need to still be spoken about.
Absolutely.
It annoys us,
Yes.
you know, it shouldn't be, but actually it is a reality.
Absolutely.
And when I came back from South Sudan, the Pope spoke at the press conference so phenomenally about women and girls, and that global leadership needs to be, we need to be bringing up the women across the globe. That is basically the path to peace. And I mean, it was a real spiritual moment. And I mean, I was in tears, and I spoke to him and thanked him, because actually we need men like him.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because we actually are together. It's not, you know, and that we don't complement, we're equal.
Yeah. And then, and for me, when I started reading from the scriptures, it was a man, it was a Sikh man, it was a Sikh preacher, had come touring the United Kingdom, and he came to Edinburgh, and he encouraged me and supported me and said, no, you're reading from the scriptures, it's when you are able to sit and read in public. And that was, for me, was a huge turning point, to be able to actually read and then understand and then pass it on to other women. But then also women need to be supporting women. When women get into positions of leadership, they're the ones that should be bringing other women with them. And I find that quite difficult sometimes when I see women in positions where they are and they don't encourage and support other women to come forward. And so sometimes we are our own worst enemies.
But you know, I mean, fortunately there'll be 2 men on the top table, but it'll be nearly all women at the top table of the General Assembly this year, because we've got a woman moderator as well. But there will be comment. You know, and actually the fact that the church is called a woman, and we haven't had that many women moderators, but we will be looked at. There's no question of it. But I absolutely agree with you. We have a responsibility to one another. But also that's about a leadership that actually, surely, whenever you reach a position of leadership, you want to see people that you work with to encourage, to empower them, to be there, to flourish themselves, whether they're male or female, and actually not to be competitive or insecure. Is it not better if people that are supposedly in your leadership position are junior to you? Why not? Can they not be better than you? I mean, that should be how we look after one another. And it's that's actually a different model of leadership. Absolutely.
And it's acknowledging that somebody younger than you can actually have those skills and that knowledge. And, you know, and it's letting them know, and not to be afraid of saying, well, actually, I can't do that. So, like, for example, social media. Everybody that knows me knows that and I'm quite happy to admit that. And I'm quite happy to encourage and support younger women who have those skills to come forward and be part of our team.
So that nicely brings me to my final questions. What would be your advice to a younger woman following a career in a male-dominated world?
To be true to who you are, to accept yourself for the beauty that you are, and to accept others as you want to be accepted, and not to make it a division, and to actually think about what it is that you uniquely bring to this situation. And when you feel scared about showing your vulnerabilities or your emotions, again, I think in leadership, we do have a different way of thinking, we have a different approach, and actually we should be able to own that and not have the characteristics of a leadership model that is one-dimensional. And we learn together from each other. I think that's
very well said. Thank you.
You should believe in yourself.
Yes.
You know, never let anybody else bring self-doubt into you. And you have to be very resilient, because even although we think like the breaking glass ceiling and everything, but actually you have to be very resilient. And have that courage to keep going.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I will open the floor if you have any questions.